This is Chapter 55 of Following the Equator. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Following the Equator by Mark Twain, Chapter 55. On the road again. Flannels in order. Across country. From Greenland's icy mountain. Swapping civilization. No field women in India. How it is in other countries. Canvas-covered cars. The tiger country. My first hunt. Some wild elephants get away. The plains of India. The Gurkhas. Women for pack-horses. A substitute for a cab. Darjeeling. The hotel. The highest thing in the Himalayas. The club. Kinchinjunga and Mount Everest. Tibetans. The prayer wheel. People going to the bazaar. There are 869 different forms of lying, but only one of them has been squarely forbidden. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Pudd'nhead Wilson's New Calendar. From Diary, February 14. We left at 4:30 p.m. Until dark we moved through rich vegetation, then changed to a boat and crossed the Ganges. February 15. Up with the sun, a brilliant morning, and frosty. A double suit of flannels is found necessary. The plain is perfectly level, and seems to stretch away and away and away, dimming and softening to the uttermost bounds of nowhere. What a soaring, strenuous, gushing fountain spray of delicate greenery a bunch of bamboo is! As far as the eye can reach, these grand vegetable geysers grace the view, their spoutings refined to steam by distance. And there are fields of bananas, with the sunshine glancing from the varnished surface of their drooping vast leaves. And there are frequent groves of palm, and an effective accent is given to the landscape by isolated individuals of this picturesque family, towering, clean-stemmed, their plumes broken and hanging ragged, nature's imitation of an umbrella that has been out to see what a cyclone is like, and is trying not to look disappointed. And everywhere through the soft morning vistas we glimpse the villages, the countless villages, the myriad villages, thatched, built of clean new matting, snuggling among grouped palms and sheaves of bamboo. Villages, villages, no end of villages, not 300 yards apart, and dozens of them in sight all the time. A mighty city, hundreds of miles long, hundreds of miles broad, made all of villages, the biggest city in the earth, and as populous as a European kingdom. I have seen no such city as this before, and there is a continuously repeated and replenished multitude of naked men in view on both sides and ahead. We fly through it mile after mile, but still it is always there, on both sides and ahead, brown-bodied, naked men and boys, plowing in the fields. But not a woman. In these 2 hours I have not seen a woman or a girl working in the fields. From Greenland's icy mountains, from India's coral strand, where Afric's sunny fountains roll down their golden sand, from many an ancient river, from many a palmy plain, they call us to deliver their land from error's chain. Those are beautiful verses, and they have remained in my memory all my life. But if the closing lines are true, let us hope that when we come to answer the call and deliver the land from its errors, we shall secrete from it some of our high civilization ways, and at the same time borrow some of its pagan ways to enrich our high system with. We have a right to do this. If we lift those people up, we have a right to lift ourselves up 9 or 10 grades or so at their expense. A few years ago I spent several weeks at Tolz in Bavaria. It is a Roman Catholic region, and not even Benares is more deeply or pervasively or intelligently devout. In my diary of those days I find this: We took a long drive yesterday around about the lovely country roads, but it was a drive whose pleasure was damaged in a couple of ways by the dreadful shrines and by the shameful spectacle of gray and venerable old grandmothers toiling in the fields. The shrines were frequent along the roads, figures of the Saviour nailed to the cross, and streaming with blood from the wounds of the nails and the thorns. When missionaries go from here, do they find fault with the pagan idols? I saw many women 70 and even 80 years old mowing and binding in the fields, and pitchforking the loads into the wagons. I was in Austria later, and in Munich. In Munich I saw gray old women pushing trucks up hill and down, long distances, trucks laden with barrels of beer, incredible loads. In my Austrian diary I find this: "In the fields I often see a woman and a cow harnessed to the plow, and a man driving. In the public street of Marienbad today I saw an old, bent, gray-headed woman, in harness with a dog, drawing a laden sled over bare dirt roads and bare pavements, and at his ease walked the driver, smoking his pipe, a hale fellow, not 30 years old." 5 or 6 years ago I bought an open boat, made a kind of a canvas wagon roof over the stern of it to shelter me from sun and rain, hired a courier and a boatman, and made a 12-day floating voyage down the Rhone from Lake Bourget to Marseille. In my diary of that trip I find this entry. I was far down the Rhone then. Passing Saint-Étienne, 2:15 p.m. On a distant ridge inland, a tall open-work structure commandingly situated, with a statue of the Virgin standing on it. A devout country. All down this river, wherever there is a crag, there is a statue of the Virgin on it. I believe I have seen 100 of them, and yet, in many respects, the peasantry seem to be mere pagans, and destitute of any considerable degree of civilization. We reached a not very promising-looking village about 4 o'clock, and I concluded to tie up for the day. Munching fruit and fogging the hood with pipe smoke had grown monotonous. I could not have the hood furled, because the floods of rain fell unceasingly. The tavern was on the river bank, as is the custom. It was dull there, and melancholy. Nothing to do but look out of the window into the drenching rain, and shiver. One could do that, for it was bleak and cold and windy, and country France furnishes no fire. Winter overcoats did not help me much. They had to be supplemented with rugs. The raindrops were so large and struck the river with such force that they knocked up the water like pebble splashes. With the exception of a very occasional wooden-shod peasant, nobody was abroad in this bitter weather. I mean, nobody of our sex. But all weathers are alike to the women in these continental countries. To them and the other animals, life is serious. Nothing interrupts their slavery. 3 of them were washing clothes in the river under the window when I arrived, and they continued at it as long as there was light to work by. One was apparently 30, another, the mother, above 50, the third, grandmother, so old and worn and gray she could have passed for 80. I took her to be that old. They had no waterproofs nor rubbers, of course. Over their shoulders they wore gunny sacks, simply conductors for rivers of water. Some of the volume reached the ground, the rest soaked in on the way. At last a vigorous fellow of 35 arrived, dry and comfortable, smoking his pipe under his big umbrella in an open donkey-cart, husband, son, and grandson of those women. He stood up in the cart, sheltering himself, and began to superintend, issuing his orders in a masterly tone of command, and showing temper when they were not obeyed swiftly enough. Without complaint or murmur, the drowned women patiently carried out the orders, lifting the immense baskets of soggy, wrung-out clothing into the cart, and stowing them to the man's satisfaction. There were 6 of the great baskets, and a man of mere ordinary strength could not have lifted any one of them. The cart being full now, the Frenchman descended, still sheltered by his umbrella, entered the tavern, and the women went drooping homeward, trudging in the wake of the cart, and soon were blended with the deluge and lost to sight. When I went down into the public room, the Frenchman had his bottle of wine and plate of food on a bare table black with grease, and was chomping like a horse. He had the little religious paper which is in everybody's hands on the Rhone borders, and was enlightening himself with the histories of French saints who used to flee to the desert in the Middle Ages to escape the contamination of woman. For 200 years France has been sending missionaries to other savage lands. To spare to the needy from poverty like hers is fine and true generosity. But to get back to India, where, as my favorite poem says, every prospect pleases and only man is vile. It is because Bavaria and Austria and France have not introduced their civilization to him yet. But Bavaria and Austria and France are on their way. They are coming. They will rescue him. They will refine the vileness out of him. Some time during the forenoon, approaching the mountains, we changed from the regular train to one composed of little canvas-sheltered cars that skimmed along within a foot of the ground and seemed to be going 50 miles an hour when they were really making about 20. Each car had seating capacity for half a dozen persons, and when the curtains were up one was substantially out of doors, and could see everywhere, and get all the breeze and be luxuriously comfortable. It was not a pleasure excursion in name only, but in fact. After a while we stopped at a little wooden coop of a station just within the curtain of the somber jungle, a place with a deep and dense forest of great trees and scrub and vines all about it. The Royal Bengal tiger is in great force there, and is very bold and unconventional. From this lonely little station a message once went to the railway manager in Calcutta: "Tiger eating station master on front porch. Telegraph instructions." It was there that I had my first tiger hunt. I killed 13. We were presently away again, and the train began to climb the mountains. In one place 7 wild elephants crossed the track, but 2 of them got away before I could overtake them. The railway journey up the mountain is 40 miles, and it takes 8 hours to make it. It is so wild and interesting and exciting and enchanting that it ought to take a week. As for the vegetation, it is a museum. The jungle seemed to contain samples of every rare and curious tree and bush that we had ever seen or heard of. It is from that museum, I think, that the globe must have been supplied with the trees and vines and shrubs that it holds precious. The road is infinitely and charmingly crooked. It goes winding in and out under lofty cliffs that are smothered in vines and foliage, and around the edges of bottomless chasms, and all the way one glides by files of picturesque natives, some carrying burdens up, others going down from their work in the tea-gardens, and once there was a gaudy wedding procession, all bright tinsel and color, and a bride, comely and girlish, who peeped out from the curtains of her palanquin, exposing her face with that pure delight which the young and happy take in sin for sin's own sake. By and by we were well up in the region of the clouds, and from that breezy height we looked down and afar over a wonderful picture, the plains of India, stretching to the horizon, soft and fair, level as a floor, shimmering with heat, mottled with cloud shadows, and cloven with shining rivers. Immediately below us, and receding down, down, down toward the valley, was a shaven confusion of hilltops, with ribbony roads and paths squirming and snaking cream yellow all over them and about them, every curve and twist sharply distinct. At an elevation of 6,000 feet we entered a thick cloud, and it shut out the world and kept it shut out. We climbed 1,000 feet higher, then began to descend, and presently got down to Darjeeling, which is 6,000 feet above the level of the plains. We had passed many a mountain village on the way up, and seen some new kinds of natives, among them many samples of the fighting Gurkhas. They are not large men, but they are strong and resolute. There are no better soldiers among Britain's native troops. And we had passed shoals of their women climbing the 40 miles of steep road from the valley to their mountain homes, with tall baskets on their backs, hitched to their foreheads by a band, and containing a freightage weighing, I will not say how many hundreds of pounds, for the sum is unbelievable. These were young women, and they strode smartly along under these astonishing burdens with the air of people out for a holiday. I was told that a woman will carry a piano on her back all the way up the mountain, and that more than once a woman had done it. If these were old women, I should regard the Gurkhas as no more civilized than the Europeans. At the railway station at Darjeeling you find plenty of cab substitutes, open coffins in which you sit, and are then borne on men's shoulders up the steep roads into the town. Up there we found a fairly comfortable hotel, the property of an indiscriminate and incoherent landlord, who looks after nothing, but leaves everything to his army of Indian servants. No, he does look after the bill, to be just to him, and the tourist cannot do better than follow his example. I was told by a resident that the summit of Kinchinjunga is often hidden in the clouds, and that sometimes a tourist has waited 22 days and then been obliged to go away without a sight of it, and yet went not disappointed, for when he got his hotel bill he recognized that he was now seeing the highest thing in the Himalayas. But this is probably a lie. After lecturing I went to the club that night, and that was a comfortable place. It is loftily situated and looks out over a vast spread of scenery. From it you can see where the boundaries of 3 countries come together, some 30 miles away. Tibet is one of them, Nepal another, and I think Herzegovina was the other. Apparently in every town and city in India the gentlemen of the British civil and military service have a club. Sometimes it is a palatial one, always it is pleasant and homelike. The hotels are not always as good as they might be, and the stranger who has access to the club is grateful for his privilege and knows how to value it. Next day was Sunday. Friends came in the gray dawn with horses, and my party rode away to a distant point where Kinchinjunga and Mount Everest show up best. But I stayed at home for a private view, for it was very cold, and I was not acquainted with the horses anyway. I got a pipe and a few blankets and sat for 2 hours at the window and saw the sun drive away the veiling gray and touch up the snow peaks one after another with pale pink splashes and delicate washes of gold, and finally flood the whole mighty convulsion of snow mountains with a deluge of rich splendors. Kinchinjunga's peak was but fitfully visible, but in the between times it was vividly clear against the sky, away up there in the blue dome more than 28,000 feet above sea level, the loftiest land I had ever seen by 12,000 feet or more. It was 45 miles away. Mount Everest is 1,000 feet higher, but it was not a part of that sea of mountains piled up there before me, so I did not see it. But I did not care, because I think that mountains that are as high as that are disagreeable. I changed from the back to the front of the house, and spent the rest of the morning there, watching the swarthy strange tribes flock by from their far homes in the Himalayas. All ages and both sexes were represented, and the breeds were quite new to me, though the costumes of the Tibetans made them look a good deal like Chinamen. The prayer wheel was a frequent feature. It brought me near to these people, and made them seem kinfolk of mine. Through our preacher we do much of our praying by proxy. We do not whirl him around a stick as they do, but that is merely a detail. The swarm swung briskly by, hour after hour, a strange and striking pageant. It was wasted there, and it seemed a pity. It should have been sent streaming through the cities of Europe or America, to refresh eyes weary of the pale monotonies of the circus pageant. These people were bound for the bazaar, with things to sell. We went down there later, and saw that novel congress of the wild peoples, and plowed here and there through it, and concluded that it would be worth coming from Calcutta to see, even if there were no Kinchinjunga and Everest. End of chapter 55.